My name is Brett Prevedel. I'm the chairperson of the RAC, and I would like to make introductions of the RAC to you at this time. Go ahead, RAC members, and introduce yourself and say who you represent. Start off, Dan.
Okay, yeah, you bet. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Abeda, and I represent the Forest Service, the Ashley National Forest. Thank you.
I'm Joe Arnold, and I represent the public.
Natasha, go ahead.
I'm Natasha, and I represent BLM, Bureau of Land Management.
Richie, are you present?
Yes, Richie Anderson, Agriculture.
Mike?
Mike Smith, I represent the non-consumptive wildlife users.
And then what other RAC members do we have? I cannot see it on my screen.
Daniel Davis, I represent Sportsman.
Thank you, Dan. I'd also like to recognize members of the, oh, sorry, Jamie.
Sorry, Jamie Aree with the Indian Tribe.
Could you do that again? I talked over the top of you, Jamie. Could you introduce yourself again?
Yeah, Jamie Aree with the Indian Tribe.
Thank you. Okay, I would also like to recognize the DWR personnel that are present, and also Randy Dirth from the Wildlife Board. Are there any other members of the Wildlife Board on this meeting? Okay, thank you. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the ability of the virus to spread from person to person, the governor has implemented a number of executive orders directed at controlling the spread of the virus by minimizing face-to-face interactions. Public gatherings are strongly discouraged by the CDC, state of Utah, and local health departments since they facilitate face-to-face contact and pose an elevated risk. The Division of Wildlife Resources and the chair of this public body have determined that public gathering at the Regional Advisory Council and Wildlife Board meetings presents a substantial risk to health and safety of those who attend. And we will therefore conduct this meeting using an electronic format. The meeting format is authorized by a recent amendment to the Utah Code and executive order by Utah Governor Gary Herbert, and will be temporarily used in place of in-person meetings that usually occur around the state. Anyone wishing to comment on the agenda topics in future meetings or to observe this meeting may do so by logging on to the Division's webpage, where instructions and links are provided. I'd like to move on and ask the RAC to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting. We will be doing roll call voting as we have in the last few meetings. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Yeah, this is Dan Abeda, and I make a motion that we approve tonight's agenda.
I will second that motion, Natasha Haddon.
Okay. Joe Arnold,
Yes, I approve.
Richie,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Daniel,
Yes.
and Jamie.
Yes.
Okay, we have unanimous approval to proceed. Have you had an opportunity to look at the minutes? If so, I would entertain any modifications, or if there are none, we can take a motion to approve the minutes. Are there any modification suggestions? Okay, if there are none, I would entertain a motion to approve last meeting's minutes from the June 4th. I take that back. Our last RAC meeting prior to the June 4th Wildlife Board meeting.
I'll make a motion, Natasha Haddon, to accept the minutes from our last wildlife RAC meeting here in the Northeast region.
Do I have a second?
Yes, this is Dan Abeta, and I will second that motion to approve the minutes from our last RAC meeting.
Thank you. Joe?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Daniel?
Yes.
And Jamie?
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous. Would you like me to give an update on the Wildlife Board meeting, Miles, or is that typically my task?
Yes, if you will, please.
Okay. The wildlife, if you remember, our last meeting was dealing with upland game primarily, and the Wildlife Board, we had some amendments to the walk-in rule and some variances on some rules for prohibited species. Everything went through fairly quiet, with the exception of the air rifle. And the Wildlife Board moved to not approve the use of air rifles for upland game at this time. And then everything else, the remainder of the upland game and the seasons were all approved as recommended by the division. Did you have any other notes on that, Miles?
No, I don't.
Okay. So with that, we will we'll move forward to the regional update. Miles?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. It's been a busy summer for us with the Division of Wildlife so far. Despite COVID-19, our field work moves on full steam ahead. So there's a lot of things going on out there. But I wanted to provide the RAC with a few updates that's been going on. First thing to talk about a little bit is our hunting license sales. The first day of our elk license sales was a bit of a rocky road this year. Essentially, people get online and they're entered into a virtual waiting room. At that point, they're entered into the system as the system has capacity for. We estimated there were upwards of 20 to 30,000 people try to access that system on the first day of elk license sales. And most of those people had multiple browsers open, trying to help their family and others get an elk tag. So it kind of overwhelmed our system. Certainly the Division of Wildlife apologizes for any inconveniences that may have caused anyone. I think at the end of the day, people were persistent. They were able to get through and be able to purchase an elk license. However, general season elk licenses sold out that day in about 8 hours. So by the end of the day, general season elk licenses were sold out, and the spike elk licenses sold out within 8 days following that. So very high demand on our hunting permits this year. There was a little bit of a snafu, and hopefully we can work those things out before next year. One of the reasons is COVID-19. Certainly the licensed vendors were not selling permits this year, so everything was done online, and there was a big rush on the first day to get that. Another thing I'd report is our fishing license sales have increased dramatically this year. It's about a 20% increase on fishing license sales for residents. However, we're still down on non-resident sales, both for fishing and hunting. But overall, there's a slight growth in license sales overall, but a big jump in fishing. And that's a trend that's going on across the West and probably across the country, really. Other states are reporting a very large increase on fishing license sales this year, as people really seem to be craving to get out and recreate in the outdoors. So that kind of spills over into law enforcement and our AIS program. Any day during the summer at Flame Gorge seems like a holiday weekend with the amount of people up there recreating. And so across the state, our AIS program has been very, very busy. Decontaminating and inspecting boats. There's been tens of thousands of boats inspected this year around the state, trying to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species organisms into other waters. And so been a lot of work and effort put into that this year. Tanya Kiefer, outreach manager, is at the Fishing with the Fox event tonight. This is the final night of that event, and essentially what's happened is 600 fish were tagged in and stocked into Moon Lake Reservoir, Mount Warner, and Moose Pond. And this event is a event sponsored by the local radio station Fox, and those people that catch a tagged fish are able to bring those in to the DWR office, and they're entered in for the drawing, which is going on tonight. So of those 600 fish, we had over half of those tags returned. I think it was like a 54% return rate on tagged fish. It's just really pretty dang high. So it's a very large event tonight with the number of people that caught tags that are there for the drawing and the prizes. And so I think there's a fish that's worth several thousand or a few $1,000s at that event. So it's a very, very, very popular event this year, and had a lot of good participation. The other thing I'll mention is there's been an active wildfire burning in Daggett County. It's called the Richard Mountain Fire. Part of that's burning in Wyoming, part of it in Utah. I think it's burned around 7,000 acres. The firefighters have done an exceptional job protecting sage grouse habitat up on top of Goslin Mountain. We have lost a little bit of lower elevation sage grouse habitat, but our habitat section's already working with the BLM fire folks on trying to develop some rehab plans for that fire to get things back in good shape for our wildlife species that are up there. So that's good news. That planning's already started, but certainly it's a fire that did take out some habitat for sure. Our habitat section's been busy with guzzler projects this summer. Had a very aggressive guzzler program the last few years. These projects this year have been in partnership with the Forest Service on some guzzlers north of Vernal, and then just recently completed some additional guzzler work in the Book Cliffs in partnership with the Mule Deer Foundation out there as well. So those are exciting projects that have been going on. And lastly, we're, as is the case the last few years, we're having a busy bear incident year. We've had a few reports and just a few instances the last week or two with bears. Just to stress to people the importance of maintaining a clean camp, keeping garbage put away. Most all the time, these bear incidents as a result of food being left out and garbage and left out. And with the dry year this year and the increased number of people out in the woods recreating, the conflicts are certainly high this year. And so we just encourage people to continue to be bear aware and really try to work hard to prevent those types of instances. So yeah, it's been a busy summer. There's a lot of other things going on. Could spend a lot of time talking about that, but here's a few highlights I'd like to share with the RAC tonight. So with that, I'll yield the time back over to the chairman, and we'll continue on with the meeting.
Thanks, Miles. Next item on our agenda is the Furbearer and Bobcat harvest recommendations for 2020 and 21. Darren, would you mind taking just a brief moment and just kind of summarize the changes in that you're proposing?
Sure. I'm sure everybody's had a chance to see the presentation. I think maybe the quick takeaway is we're making a recommendation because of where our biological parameters fall to reduce the permits available per person from 5 to 4. And then we're shortening the season slightly at the beginning of the season in November and beginning it on November 25th through March 1st. And that's just right along with what the plan guidelines are. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Questions from the RAC? Okay, if there are no questions, does anyone have any comments or want to bring up any topics related to the Bobcats? I believe the significant change is reducing the number of tags available per individual from 5 to 4. and then also some minor season changes. Correct, Darren?
Sorry, I'm not quick on the mute button. Yes, that's right.
Okay. So does anybody on the RAC have any input on the Bobcat recommendations? Okay, if there are none, I will open it up for a motion.
Chairman, let me just to quickly summarize the public comments
Oh,
received
yeah.
electronically. The comments we received, there were about 28% that opposed the proposal. I think some of those reasons why is they didn't want to have the season shortened, didn't want the numbers cut. So that was really the primary reason. There were a couple comments that I think fundamentally probably disagreed with trapping bobcats, but that was the ones that opposed. There were 20% neutral, and then 52% of the respondents actually supported the division's recommendations. So that's a summary of the public comments received electronically.
Thanks, Miles. Sorry about that. Keep me in line. Okay, is there any discussion from the RAC? Okay, I will now open it for any motions.
I'll make a motion to accept the Bobcat recommendations as presented.
Okay, we have a motion from Natasha. Do we have a second?
This is Richie. I'll second that motion.
Okay, roll call. Dan Abeda,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Richie made the motion. Natasha, Richie seconded the motion. Natasha made the motion. Mike,
Yes.
Daniel,
Yes.
and Jamie.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. We'll now move on to item 6, which is the Cougar recommendations. And this one's had quite a bit more interest or comments, and I'd like to just bring up a few items, hopefully clarify the situation a little bit. Several of the comments were related to items we're not able to address at the RAC level tonight. There was new legislation by the Utah legislature last winter that directed the DWR to take action to reduce cougar numbers on units where the big game herd objective was below objective. So many of these changes, as they involve predator management plans or areas moving to predator management plan, are already complete. And so as we got the comments, and Miles could maybe address this, they were kind of blurred between that issue and then the proposals that are on the table tonight for us to discuss, which are the permits, the seasons, and et cetera. So I'd also like to bring up the fact that there seems to be a perception that when you increase the number of lion permits substantially, the harvest therefore follows directly. And I've asked Randall to kind of, it's so dependent on weather and hunting conditions and remoteness of units. There's a lot of factors that go into lion harvest. And just because there's more permits available does not necessarily mean that they're going to harvest a relative amount of lions. If the permits are doubled, that you'll get double the permits. And so Randall Thacker has agreed to kind of talk about the units here. And remember, we had pretty high we were harvest objective, and we'd increased the numbers prior to this legislation fairly significantly. And so with them target permit numbers, Randall's going to kind of address what the actual harvest was this year. Could you take that, Randall?
Sure. We got on and looked at those, make sure, double check the harvest statistics even just today to make sure these are up to date. And one of them I know that we've had a lot of interest on in the past is the Book Cliffs, out to the Book Cliffs East Hunt. The quota is at 44 this year, and a lot because of weather conditions, those kind of things too. But our harvest currently to date is only at 22, so it's at half of the objective. To just give some other examples there, the North Slope, the Summit West Daggett, which is on the North Slope in our region there, we've got the quota of 10. We've only harvested 4 of those. On the Three Corners North Summit unit up there too, we've got had a quota of 10, and we're at 3 at the harvest right now. South Slope Vernal Diamond Bonanza is the closest to reaching, came the closest to reaching objective. It had the quota of 24 with a total of 22 harvested. The South Slope Yellowstone has a quota of 10 and is at 6 actually harvested. The Wasatch Mountains of Vinnequin was an increase on that quota last year too, and it's up to 30. Currently we've had the harvest of 13. So yeah, it just simply increasing the quota doesn't always result in an increased harvest. There's a lot of factors that do come into play with weather and conditions. And my personal opinion is it depends on the number of snowstorms we get on a Friday evening, so that Saturday morning the houndsmen can get out and hunt, and that seems to play a factor in it too. But there's a lot of other variables that do factor into to our harvest levels than just our quota we set.
Thank you, Randall. Also, on the Book Cliffs, just for interest, we had a lot of discussion last year when we moved the permits, and I believe it went from 29 to 41, and then it's been bumped up to 44 now. And the harvest was relatively the same. It was a harvest of 21, I believe, a year ago with 29 tags. And this year we're kind of at the same harvest, just because of all the other factors that come into play.
You're right. It's very similar and that kind of thing. So.
Okay. Should we talk about the comments at this point, Miles?
Could I make one? We're going to recommend an amendment to one of our recommendations. Is that all right if I present that now, and then maybe we could talk about comments?
Yes, please do. And also please address the multiple tag opportunity, exactly how the mechanics of that would work.
Sure. All right, let me present my screen here. Can everybody see that slide? So what we're recommending, what we recommended in the original presentation for 3 units in the state, LaSalle, San Juan Mountains, and Book Cliffs East, was that the season for lion hunting with dogs be closed from April 15th through November 2nd. That's in the original proposal. After talking with the regional biologists a little further, we'd like to amend that to maintain the same closure, except for people that have valid permits to hunt bears or pursue bears during the following season. So spring bear, spring limited entry bear, fall limited entry, multi-season, and pursuit seasons. So if a person has any of those permits for those units, they could, if they have a cougar permit, harvest objective or pursuit tag, they could hunt with dogs and hunt cougars during that time frame while the bear hunts are ongoing. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions about that. If people are confused by that, please let me know. But the change here is that if you're in the field hunting bears, you could also hunt lions at the same time. So let's see, let me stop that. And then on the 2 tags, the way that it would work is there'd essentially be the opportunity to take 2 lions during what we call our fiscal year. So from July 1st through June 30th of the following year, a person could take up to 2 lions. They'd need some combination of 2 permits, though. You can't take 2 lions with 1 permit. You'd have to have a permit for each lion you wanted to take. One of the things the director has already implemented and is already in effect is the spot and stock season for this fall. It opened on the 1st of August and it'll run through December 31st. And a person can obtain 1 of those permits over the counter. If you want to go buy one, you cannot use dogs with that permit. It's a $30 permit. If you had that permit, you could also purchase a second permit. Either you could get one through the draw for a split unit, for example, or you could purchase a harvest objective permit and take a second lion with one of those permits. You could also take a second lion if you had 2 harvest objective permits and the unit was open. And probably the third combination would be if you drew a split season permit, you could buy a harvest objective permit as well and hunt during the harvest objective portion of that unit or on a harvest objective unit. So I hope that's not too confusing, but basically you could take up to 2 lions if you have the proper permits, proper valid permits. And the time frame that counts is from July to June the following year. So once you've taken 2 during that time frame, you'd be done hunting for that year. There are a couple of reasons we're recommending this. One is, as Randall pointed out, on a lot of these units where we have quotas set and we're not seeing those units reach our management objective quota, we'd like to see if people had the opportunity to take a second lion. They have the skill, the equipment, the ability. Perhaps that could increase our success. The other unit that we're hoping that'll help on is a predator management unit where we're trying to reduce cougar densities fairly significantly over a short period of time. This is an opportunity for people who are feel to take a second animal as well. So that's the reason we're recommending it, and that's how it'll work. So other than that, I think everybody's seen the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
On that season, this is Brett speaking. When the harvest objective season is November to November, why is the 2 lion season? What kind of complications is that going to be? Where it overlaps the valid permit?
We'll need to, just because of the way that our recommendation cycles are right now, we had to sort of pick a time frame, and that's what we decided to do. I'd like to see, as we move forward and have some discussions about plan and timing, that we kind of get these seasons all aligned, that they're running basically July to June each year. But that's something we're going to have to do at a future date, in the near future, hopefully. So the way it would work is your permit would be good from November to November, but and typically what happens is that the harvest takes place during the winter time, and so we kind of cut the year in half in the middle of the summer, and we felt like that'd be the best way to address harvest. So, for example, if a unit was still open, as some units in the region are, and a person currently has a harvest objective permit, they could go ahead and use that before the opening for hounds in November, and take a lion. And then if they wanted to purchase a second permit for after November 2nd, they could take a second lion. But that would be their 2 for the season, basically. So we're going to keep track of that, and hopefully we'll be able to readjust some things moving forward, so those things are more aligned. But that's kind of how we're tackling it right now.
Thank you. Should we address the public comment? There was a lot of interest in this topic, and we received quite a few fairly lengthy comments, well thought out. So Miles, would you take that?
Sure. So overall, 16% of the people supported the proposal as presented. Of course, this is before the amended proposal came out. 12% of the people were neutral, and then 72% actually opposed. So to kind of summarize a little bit of why people opposed, of course, everyone on the RAC did have an opportunity to look at those comments. It's about the harvest of cougars with collars, research project type cougars. So there were some comments about that, both for and against. Some people were concerned about the loss of data and the cost of collaring a cougar. Others thought that you should take into account what the hunter harvest would be on these cougar populations, and by harvesting collared cougars would give us an idea of that. So they're mostly, though, with that regard, most of the people were kind of opposed to harvesting collars with cougars. At least a couple of the two comments we received in that regard. As Brett pointed out before, there were a number of comments that were somewhat opposed to and felt like there was too much harvest on cougars, but that relates back to the House Bill 125 and the mandate, given that the division addressed cougars on some of these units in a predator management strategy. So there were people that were certainly not wanting to see any more harvest on cougars. I would say there were some other comments that wanted to see the units managed as a split season strategy here locally. And then to balance it out, there were some people that were opposed to closing the pursuit season in the Book Cliffs to cougars during the summer and spring months. And then lastly, there were other people that were opposed to taking more than one lion. So anyhow, but with that being said, there were actually two people that opposed the proposal that didn't feel like there was enough lion harvest in response to recovering deer populations and things like that. So I would say there was a couple of other people that responded that were, I think, fundamentally just opposed to lion hunting in general. So anyhow, within that opposed, there's a number of reasons why. I think a large number of those respondents didn't want to see any more additional cougar harvest. But that, again, relates back to what Brett talked about with the House Bill 125 and that mandate as well. So that's a rough summary of the comments, and there was a lot to go through there. So hopefully the RAC members did do that to really understand what people were talking about. But that's the synopsis of what people had to say.
Thank you, Miles. And is it safe to, after reading all the comments, safe to say that there's a lot of public opinion on how you value deer versus lions, whether they're equal on the landscape or whether the tool of managing lions, is a valid way to increase deer herd. So it's just people's values of which one they prefer, I guess. Is that an accurate? There was quite a few comments like that, wasn't there?
Yeah, certainly, and we did have a number of local houndsmen respond, and they did make their voices heard through this comment platform. So, yeah, I think some of those individuals really value hunting cougars, and so they want to see a robust number of cougars to be able to go out and pursue and hunt.
Thank you. Should I open up to questions, Darren, or did you have any other input right now?
No, I'm ready to answer any questions anybody has.
Okay. Questions from the RAC?
Yeah, this is Dan Abeta, and I have a question. Maybe not so much for Darren, but if there's somebody on this in this meeting right now from the division that can talk about the decrease in the number of deer tags for this year, for 2020. That'll kind of help me kind of put things into perspective, I think, a little bit. As it's kind of indirectly related to what we're talking about. But is there anybody on the call from the division that can talk about what the number, what the number of the reduction in deer tags was for this year?
I was going to say Dax or Randall, if you're on it, you might have a better kind of feel for the discussions that were surrounding that than I would. But I'd be happy to talk about sort of 30,000 foot predator prey stuff. But if you want to address that,
I can talk to it a little bit. And Dan, let me know if I'm answering your question or discussing the things that you're curious about. We did have some poor fawn survival, and some units showed poor adult doe survival, experienced some declines in population numbers. And when we looked at those data in the context of our buck to doe ratio objectives for the units, we plugged in, real time, the best survival data we had, and then basically predicted, what kind of results we would have this fall based on, different levels of permit numbers, and saw that in order to meet our buck to doe ratio objectives, we needed to reduce permits for buck hunting. It's good to keep in mind that buck hunting has less of a biological impact on a deer herd, but buck hunting is driven by biological factors. Largely, how you can hunt bucks is driven by biological factors. So the biology drives buck hunting, but buck hunting doesn't drive the biology that much, if that makes sense. We only need a certain number of bucks to maintain, to get our does pregnant and maintain a biologically viable herd. Some of those bucks are surplus. Those are the ones that we target with our hunting. But if we have low production, we have low fawn survival, low fawn to doe ratios, declining deer populations, then that affects the quantity of bucks that are available to hunters. And so we adjust permits accordingly. So I don't know, maybe that's too broad, Dan, but because we were seeing low fawn survival, low production on some units, we recommended reductions, and those reductions passed for buck permits in most of our units in the region for this fall.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Dax. Yeah, I just was, as I was reviewing some of the public comments, those were some of the public comments that I read where people were asking those questions, and so I just kind of wanted to get your take on that, and that sounds familiar.
I saw one comment that said something to the effect of, why doesn't the division just cut buck permits and let us have more lions? I saw one comment that said something to that effect, and I don't know that the logic behind that comment is totally sound. Because like I said, the biology drives what we can do with bucks, but the bucks don't really drive biology. By cutting buck permits, it doesn't necessarily increase productivity. It doesn't necessarily grow us more deer. So, buck management is different than population management. There is some overlap at some extreme ends of the window within which we try to manage bucks. But just saying, okay, we're going to cut a bunch of buck tags so we can have more lions on the landscape doesn't really balance out that way, because productivity of the herds is not necessarily driven by bucks unless you get to a really, really low number or a really, really high number. And the objectives that we manage for are really in the middle of a pretty broad range.
Right. When we're talking about predator-prey relationships too, Dan, our concern isn't so much how many bucks lions eat. It's those adult does and fawns that they may be removing from the population, and that really drives whether the population remains stagnant or grows. And those are the things we're looking at when we're making decisions about what kind of strategies we have for predator management, and that's what went into a lot of these decisions about what is in predator management plans this time around. That data. we've got some really good data on survival.
All right, well, yeah, thank you for those responses.
If I may, Jeff Taniguchi has joined us, and I'd like to give him an opportunity to introduce himself as a RAC member and who he represents, and he will be voting on this topic. Jeff, can you hear us? He was on the list. I believe he's joined us, so we'll wait a moment until he gets his microphone set up or whatever the issue is. I'd entertain other questions from the RAC regarding the lion proposals.
Yeah, this is Daniel Davis. I've got a couple of questions. So early on in the predator management plans that have lapped over the years, there was some strategic strategy put in place in conjunction with the methods of take, be it harvest objective, split, and limited entry. A lot of that was driven towards shifting focus to priority areas. However, the way some of this lays out doesn't appear to be much of a focus. And the reason I ask is when you have an area in the state like the Northeastern region where everything's primarily harvest objective, it kind of doesn't force your pressure to your desired needs for what management agendas are on the table. So is there any consideration to any of that taken with the recommendations that you guys have made for this year?
There's a couple of things that changed, Daniel, that actually impact the cougar management plan, and we're going to need to actually go back into that plan and revisit it based on because of the legislation requirements, and it changed how we implement predator management plans. If you recall, this spring we brought around a new policy for predator management plans. And what we did is we asked all of our district biologists to use the new policy and reevaluate everything, all their units, even if they were currently under a predator management plan in the past, especially for deer. We didn't change the requirements much for sheep. And so those units pretty much stayed the same, but we did relook at things for deer. One of the things that the new policy does is it really empowers our district biologists to make those decisions, and there's enough flexibility in it that they need to look at their data and then justify what their concerns are. And so that was our approach for predator management plans. Maybe, if you've got some specific units that you want some details on, we'd be happy to we could explain why maybe they had predator managements implemented. But it does change, the philosophy changed a little bit. We used to designate hunt strategies kind of based on whether predator numbers were having impacts, and that sort of thinking in the plan, I would say, kind of got preempted by the new approach to predator management plans. And so now hunt strategies is probably more of a preference for district and regional biologists based on what they see on the ground and what they think will be the best fit. Does that cover your question? I don't know if you got all the answers you needed. We'd be happy to dive in if you need to.
No, understood completely on the new House bill and what accompanies a predator management plan. So more or less the units that aren't under a PMP or under objective for the other species in that unit that still maintain a harvest objective strategy. When other units in that region do fall under the category for the other big game species to maintain predator management or a harvest objective strategy. So I was just kind of curious on some of them units where they maintain that status when it's easier to shift focus to the areas of need in non-relation to HB 125.
Yeah, I don't, do you have a specific unit you're thinking about that might help us?
Well,
walk
yes,
through it?
I've got two as a matter of fact. And so the question being, there was 2 units combined, the Avinaquin and Current Creek. The combination of those, is that something going through the RAC process, or was that a directive in regards to the HB 125?
I'm double checking, but Randall probably knows. Let's see. So we combined the Avinaquin and Current Creek. It's under a predator management plan.
Those were combined, Darren.
Yeah.
Those were combined because of the House bill. It was because the Current Creek had been a straight limited entry unit. And we were going to do away with that. And rather than have just the Current Creek be a separate unit that way, and we've already had half of the true Current Creek unit, as far as a subunit goes in, attached to the Avinaquin anyway. Derek can comment on this if you'd like to, but we just simply combined those 2 in, left the objective what it already was on the Avinaquin, and combined the Current Creek portion north of Highway 40, and added that in with the rest of the Current Creek subunit and the Avinaquin unit together to create the same unit we use for bears. It's basically the same unit for deer. It's basically the Wasatch Mountains East essentially now too, and so it will kind of simplify that and maybe reduce some confusion in the future.
Yeah, Daniel, this is Derek. Randall nailed that, but yeah, just with it being such a small unit, I was looking at it, today. If we just had the Current Creek harvest objective, the way it's set up now, it's like 10 miles wide in places with large portions of tribal land, private property, and it just would have been, I don't know. And then looking at some of the collar data from these cougars and how big of an area they cover, it just didn't seem like that was a good idea. And just to keep it simple, try to keep our boundaries good and give a larger area for sportsmen to hunt cougars in. I think that was a big part of it.
So that was one of the questions, is how they combined and when they combined, because didn't see that come through the process, I guess. And then to the vernal south slope, maintaining harvest objective.
Are you curious why that isn't under predator management or?
Yes, exactly. Or no, predator management or a split strategy.
Oh, one or the other? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll let the regional folks answer that.
Speaking of South Slope vernal unit. Daniel?
That's correct, Brett. Yes.
Okay, Daniel, this is Clint Sampson. You want to know why the vernal unit isn't a split unit, why it's harvest objective?
If you could just highlight, why that maintained harvest objective in your recommendation.
Yeah, I honestly, I really don't know what to tell you. That's just, I guess, how we've been operating, and we haven't really seen a huge need to change it. I mean, our female harvest isn't, skyrocketing, and we're kind of recovering from a rougher year with our deer herd. And so, yeah, we felt like it could continue to operate as it is.
It also helps address on that unit, Daniel, this is Randall Thacker. It can help address some of the problems with a lot of the private land on Diamond Mountain and some of the issues that come up there. But that unit actually we could have tried to, it meets the definition of the new guidelines for sure to go under predator management there, and we would have had an unlimited quota on there, but we kind of felt on the vernal that it was close enough to meeting the criteria there. We could leave that as a regular harvest objective unit and not have to go into a predator management situation and leave that where it didn't see the need being that demanding there, and so we kept that the way it's been.
I'll maybe add one other thing as well. This is Dax. In this region, we've seen a lot. We've seen that we are come more close to hitting our harvest objective when we manage units as a straight harvest objective rather than as a split. When we manage units as split units, we usually don't harvest as many cougars. One of the other things that really could be helpful as well with having a harvest objective season, you have that longer season, and when you have issues with private lands that were mentioned, specifically on the vernal, dry fork is one every single year. We have multiple incidents with lions coming down to dry fork and eating people's goats or pets, and oftentimes landowners or their friends or family are able to purchase a harvest objective permit and harvest those lions rather than us having to send wildlife services in there or division staff to go in and remove a lion. We would always rather that a sportsman have that opportunity to remove a lion than us have to go remove a lion. So a lot of times when we have that kind of that interface where we have deer habitat, aka cougar habitat, and private lands and housing, kind of that rural suburban interface, harvest objective seems to be a good strategy for us to be able to have more flexibility to allow sportsmen to address issues that come up.
Awesome. Thank you. I had one more question. It was a rule amendment that is being proposed in regards to lion accompaniment. Could you, and age of harvest for lion, could you address that a little more in detail, Darren, what the objective is there?
Yeah, I think the intent of the rule was always to prevent someone from taking a kitten or an adult accompanied by a kitten. But we had language in there about any cougar accompanied by an adult, and my concern was if you've got older age kittens, maybe a couple male cats with a female mother, it's going to be difficult for a houndsman or a hunter to distinguish between those body sizes all the time. And it just seemed like a requirement was asking a little bit much from people that are out there. So if it's accompanied by a kitten less than a year old, that's usually fairly easy to tell. And of course, spots, for very young kittens. And so we just removed the part about being accompanied by an adult. And we have had some instances where, a year-and-a-half-old kitten was taken, relatively large, and just felt like that was putting people in a tough spot, especially if they're not side by side. So that's kind of the thinking behind that one, Daniel.
So it was more relation to body size and identification. Is that thought process into more of the spot and stalk reality versus the pursuit and tracking method?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, we haven't had this spot and stalk opportunity yet, but certainly that, if you see a unspotted lion from a distance, it makes it more difficult to determine the age. And if there's two together, they could be litter mates. They could be, so in that case, neither one is accompanied by an adult. So it just wasn't clean. If you're talking about writing someone a citation, obviously if it's a lion with some much smaller young of the year, that's a little bit easier to tell. And then even guys that have them in trees, a young cat, guys that chase a lot of lions know the difference. But for all intents and purposes, a year-and-a-half-old lion looks pretty big in a tree to some people. So that was the thinking.
So would it clear things up a little bit more to remove an age reference more to markings and appearance of identification that way? Because, I mean, realistically, could an division employee age a lion at check-in, or would you come after me after a tooth sample?
We'd look at teeth, but if it doesn't have spots on it, Daniel, we're not going to pursue that unless it's obviously a yearling. We might take a look at it. The question is going to be, would a reasonable person know that this is not an adult or subadult cat?
Sure, and the reason I asked that question is because it was brought up in part of the comment period, and some worries about orphaning the younger objectives and orphaning them and those types of things, and easier to address more on not an age and get away from the age classification.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, from the orphaning standpoint, once those kittens are around a year old, they've got a pretty good chance of surviving on their own. Prior to that, when the body size is significantly less than an adult female, the chances are less. So that's what we're asking people to evaluate in the field. We could change up some stuff in the education portion to emphasize that as well.
One last question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
You bet. Proceed.
On population objectives that the division's taken into consideration for predator management, there's been a lot of stuff going around the state and work groups in identifying some of these limiting factors, and it calls out in HB 125 that if they are not, predators aren't perceived as being the limiting factor, but yes, I understand helping to rebound some of those populations. It's also been identified that some of the population objectives for the big game animals are not all that realistic in some cases. A lot of it's social driven. What kind of a cycle are we going to see where those populations and assessments come into play a little more accurately?
I can maybe speak to this one, Daniel, or you can, Darren. Sorry, I don't mean to jump in front of you.
Jack. I think, no, you're good. I was just going to mention you guys are in the middle of it, so go ahead.
Yep. So we some of the really neat things we've learned from the deer study and the cougar study and the neonate study we're doing in the Book Cliffs and in units all across the state is I think it's helping us get a better idea of what carrying capacity is on some of these units. And carrying capacity is complex, and it varies year to year. If you have a really bad drought year followed by a bad winter, your carrying capacity is a lot lower than if you have a really wet summer and a mild winter. So carrying capacity is not a static number. It's something that fluctuates. But generally, by looking at the condition of the deer, we have deer in hand every year on a lot of units across the state. And we were strategically chose those units. So even though we don't have them on every single unit, we have deer on units that can be surrogates for each other that are really similar, where we can get a pretty good idea on maybe some surrounding units from one unit. But by looking at those deer and their body condition, the body fat percentages, the ultrasound, looking at loin thickness, I think we're closing in. We're narrowing our knowledge gap there when it comes to looking at our population objectives. The vaginal implant transmitter study for the neonates in the Book Cliffs that showed us a lot about fawn and calf production and the role that predators might play, in those circumstances, as well as habitat and the number of animals, density dependence. And so I think we're taking that information into consideration, looking back at historic population objectives, and then looking at that in light of current data and body condition scores and ingest-free body fat percentages in animals. And we will see recommended revisions to our population objectives for most of the units based on a combination of historical data, then current data, looking at animal conditions, and that'll be coming around this fall with the buck bull once in a lifetime season date and hunt boundary recommendations that go through this fall. So we are looking at that. And Daniel, I know you spend a lot of time in the book cliffs. That's one we're looking at a lot, and you'll see a recommended reduction in the population objective for deer in the book list, because the number that we have in there historically, the objective of 15,000, when we compare that to the state of our deer and what we're seeing in body condition, it's going to change. And another thing to keep in mind too, I guess, like I said, carrying capacity is something that changes and moves, and our population objectives need to be that way as well. If we end up with some giant fire somewhere, this is one of those years where we're having some of those big fires. Some of those fires might do a lot of damage and damage winter ranges, and we'll have to adjust carrying capacity, we'll have to adjust population objectives down. If we have fires in the right elevational bands, it might be really beneficial, and there might be circumstances where we would, follow up after that, after a few years after a fire, seeing what happens and recommend an increase in objectives. So, these are fluid numbers that we're working with, but we're trying to do the best we can, and you will see some recommended adjustments coming soon.
From the predator side, knowing what your carrying capacity for those prey animals is key. The closer you are to that capacity for the landscape, the less effective predator reductions are going to be. And so, because some other cause of mortality will take over, either environmental conditions or something like that. So it's important that as we're considering predator management plans that we're aware of what those prey populations should be relative to what the landscape can support.
Most definitely, and thank you. And yeah, it was a curiosity question. Being involved with the Book Cliffs Working Group, as Dax mentioned, and Miles has given updates on. It's not an easy task. It's very cumbersome and involves a lot of parties. So I was just wondering if the division is going to take an approach more at direct units in those type of situations like the Book Cliffs, and or if it's kind of region by region basis. So thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Other questions from the RAC?
This is Jeff Taniguchi. Sorry for being a little bit tardy, but I've made it. I represent the sportsmen, and I'd just like to make a comment that the last little bit that was spoken made a lot of sense to me, and the fact that you can adjust, and with that adjustment, I feel pretty good about the proposal. So just a comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And Miles it's been said a few times, but we know that the population objectives, now that they're in the legislation saying it's based on the population objectives, we've known that they need some attention, especially when we were working through the Book Cliffs population objectives. Otherwise, it takes away your flexibility of what you can do on the lion harvest. Is that correct, Miles? With the large population objective as it is out there now?
Sure. The House bill definitely does relate to what the population objective is and where the population is in relation to that. So just an update. Our range trend crew, it's a crew that goes around each region every 5 years. They're in the Northeast region this year. And a lot of those range trend sites are located on winter range areas, but there are some on summer ranges. But they look at our deer habitat each year to look at the trends to determine how our habitat's doing. So there's an index that they generate as well. This talks about how healthy it is, and so we really look at that to determine are any of our winter ranges getting overused. And so what happens after that 5-year rotation, the year following that's when in this region we'll be updating all those unit management plans for mule deer. So we'll have that new data plus the historical data to look at and be able to make those adjustments. Certainly There's some other factors and information that we'll have coming in as well. But next year, we'll have some mule deer management plans for this region, and that's where we'll look to make some of those adjustments to those population objectives. And the Book Cliffs, I would anticipate that that's one where we'll probably be making an adjustment to that population objective as well. So the RAC will certainly have a chance to look at that, I think, in the next year. So
thank you. Any other questions from the RAC?
This is Richie. I just got a quick question. So remind me what the primary reason is for doing away with the use of hounds April 5th or from April to November. What's the DWR's primary reason for that? Again, I've read over some stuff, but I'm not real clear on what the primary objective is there.
Okay, yeah, Richie, this ties back to some things we talked about with bears. There have been some concerns from land management agencies on the LaSalle specifically about the numbers of people that are afield in the spring, and so we made some adjustments to the bear, the availability of pursuit permits specifically to non-residents on the LaSalle's, but we included the San Juan and the Book Cliffs because those are kind of our big 3 units for bear pursuit and hunting. Those are some of our densest populations. What they saw in the LaSalle's this spring is that there are a lot of folks still coming from out of state, bringing dogs and hunting lions, which is, and it's, our enforcement officers are suspicious that they're actually chasing bears, but if you don't follow them to the tree, it's difficult to make an assessment as to what they're up to. And so it kind of defeated the purpose of the changes we made to the bear season. And so they asked us if we could do something with the lion season to make it a little bit easier to know if someone's afield with hounds. It's clear what kind of permits they have to do. So the proposal is, you can hunt lions, but you've got to have some sort of bear permit to be there. The reason we include the Book Cliffs and the San Juan is again, just anticipating some overflow. We may get a lot of people hitting those units because they can't go to the LaSalle. So that's the rationale. It was driven by some requests from law enforcement down in the Southeastern region, and based on some of the concerns that they had this spring. And this is kind of the solution we came up with.
Okay. I guess my concern is, I understand the law enforcement. It's a very difficult thing to pin down, especially on the intent part of it. But if there's been no citations, if there's been no convictions, I'm a little bit worried about limiting opportunity based on speculation, I guess. And you're probably right. There's probably some of that occurring for sure. But I don't know if it's the right approach to convict of guilty. We have a deal innocent until proven guilty. I'm just a little bit leery of that. I'd rather see the out-of-state hunters limited, I guess. It's unfortunate that other states have done away with hound hunting, but that's kind of their problem. Those houndsmen needs to work within their state to get that changed. So I don't want to convict people, innocent until proven guilty. I think maybe we need to monitor that, wait another year, and gather some more information, and we kind of have to give the benefit of the doubt until we can prove it. So that's just kind of my thought on there.
Thanks, Richie. And I think Darren's modified rule that he presented at the start of this section kind of takes care of some of the non-resident concerns, doesn't it, Darren? Because they're limited anyway.
Right. Yeah. So for spring, especially for spring pursuit seasons, there are unlimited permits available to residents over the counter. So you could buy a pursuit permit for bears and go ahead and hunt. And I'm sure there's some guys that are hunting lions in the spring as well. But most of the time when that bear season opens up, that's when that's what those houndsmen are after. And so this recommendation would limit non-residents to the number of pursuit permits available for those units. It's a little more restrictive for summer because those 3 units are restricted summer pursuit units, and so that would restrict houndsmen hunting lions on those units in the summer. We don't see a lot of harvest. I don't think, I think on the 3 units over the last few years, we've probably seen about half a dozen lions taken during the summer months. That dry ground pursuing is pretty tough for lions. And so, the thinking is that, if someone's chasing lions out that time of year, they're probably actually after bears. They're just kind of gaming the system. But again, we need to make a case. This would probably make it a little easier for law to make a case if they couldn't be there unless they had the other permit. But this is just our recommendation for dealing with some of those concerns.
This is Jamie Reed. Can you clarify, are there other use of hounds during that period from April 15th to November 2nd?
Yeah, currently, if the unit was harvest objective, it's essentially open year round, and so a person could be there with a harvest objective permit and using dogs all year round, unless there's some other restriction. And on some of those units, there's there's some no dog seasons in the fall for the San Juan and the LaSalle's during the limited entry elk hunt, I believe. So that's the current state of things. This just kind of extends it earlier in the year and starts it in the spring rather than later in the fall. Book cliffs, you guys have to remind me. I don't think you have any special restrictions for lion hunting currently on the book cliffs. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Is there, sorry, this is Jamie again. Is there any concerns from people as far as running hounds during big game hunting seasons, specifically August through October? Do you guys get that concern?
We do occasionally get some concerns. They tend to be focused or concentrated on those 3 units, and so it seems like they're usually bear hunters, or it's during bear seasons. So we've made adjustment to bear seasons on the book cliffs and those other 2 in order to try and address some of that. We try not to have hounds afield during, like for example, archery hunts. But the lion seasons, theoretically someone could still be there chasing lions, and they don't do it much, just because it's not really the optimal time to be afield chasing lions. So that factored into our decision on how to approach this restriction. It's just that time of year is not. There are some people that hunt lions, but not very many.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the RAC?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
I'd just like to know from Daniel Davis kind of where the local houndsmen are on that restriction from April to November.
Yeah, so first off, appreciate the division's approach to amending that, first and foremost. The state took a pretty big black eye over the bear restrictions on targeting the non-residents. Last thing we want to lose is support from our non-resident counterparts that raise traditionally and for generations running hounds, and that's a tough deal to address. And with the proposement that Darren has made, those units are heavily utilized, both for mountain lion, for bear, all the big game species. There's a lot of activity on those units, and for those time frames that they would address, it only takes the those opportunities away in the fall and through the summer when it's a restricted pursuit, when we're trying to limit those number of people already. And that's already in place with the bear. So the recommendation with maintaining the opportunity to go while having a valid bear permit, it addresses that. Because when I'm on the unit, I'm there legal, it's during bear season, and I cut a lion, why should I have to leave? If I can pursue that lion and catch it, and it's a lion of choice, I mean, I do have the opportunity to harvest that. Whereas in the original proposal, I wouldn't even be able to pursue or take part in any of that. I would just have to keep driving and let it go. So with the new proposed, I'm in support of that. And so are the houndsmen at large. And that's a lot of the comments that were brought forward. As Miles mentioned, we're in address to that.
Okay, thank you.
Dan Abeta, did you have a comment?
I did. Yeah, this is Dan Abeta, and this is a question for Darren. And you don't have to get too down into the weeds on this question, Darren, but the other 4 regions, I'm sure there was a lot of discussion about this topic and the recommendations from the division. But after all the discussion and whatnot, how did were they supportive of the proposal, the recommendations from the state?
Yeah, 3 of the 4 RACs approved it as presented with the amendments. Dan, Southern Region removed and it passed that we don't limit it in the summer on those units, and that those units actually mirror the rest of the state. So that it's a little different, but so yeah, 3 out of 4 as proposed, one different so far.
Okay, thank you, Darren.
Do we have any other questions from the RAC?
Yeah, this is Joe Arnold. I have a question. You talked earlier about the statistics on the Diamond Mountain versus the Book Cliffs as far as harvest. Any idea why that is successful? Diamond area sounded like 80-90% versus maybe 50% in the Book Cliffs, with increasing the quota, but we're really not being more successful there. Any feedback there?
I'll throw that to the region.
Clint, would you like to jump in on that?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of things, Joe, that go into harvest in the Book Cliffs. Typically, there's a lot of access, depending on weather, things like that. A lot of the unit can get shut down. But what we found in the past, too, is some guys are just happy to go pursue and not punch their tag as well. And so a lot of factors going into it. And in the end, if you look at our harvest over the last few years, we have kind of jumped back and forth between split units and harvest objective. And what I'm seeing as far as trends is that we usually kill around 30, on good years, and then poor years, we kill, in the high teens, stuff like that, lower 20s. So it seems like it's pretty consistent on those numbers. So that's, basically all I have to say.
Okay. One other question maybe on the, this is Joe again, on the spot and stock, is that going to overlap deer and elk seasons? Is that part of the idea that somebody could purchase one of those, and if they had an encounter, then they're able to take that animal during, one of the open seasons, general deer, general elk?
Yeah, that's exactly the reason the legislation asked the division to provide that opportunity. And so that's exactly what this is for. So we will see how much success we see on it. Idaho has a similar opportunity. You can buy a lion or bear tag and take it during those seasons as a resident. And they see about a 20% incidental take. I suspect ours probably won't be quite that high, but that maybe is somewhere in the neighborhood of what we might see.
Just a question maybe for Daniel, and would that follow over into bears? I know Colorado has that as well, that you can hunt bears, on a spot and stock. Is the houndsman, are the houndsmen worried about that because now they won't be able to pursue more animals because of spot and stock versus the houndsman?
So I'm going to speak as Daniel. This subject gets thrown around between all your different groups. And as a sportsman, if you're a hardcore deer hunter, a hardcore elk hunter, whatever that may be, people do have their favorites. Anyways, the focus for me is on biological management. The intended purpose of these hunts is to take female, because a lot of the choices that tend to be made using hounds in trophy hunting, just like deer and elk, is to go after the larger males and preferably of that nature. So yes, it's a concern for some as it is a drastic reduction or potential reduction in population, which is the objective. But bears, they're easier to see on the spot and stock, and I don't feel that it's a viable comparison to Colorado because they have no other management tool. They outlawed the use of hounds on taking bears years ago, and their bear population is a problem. What we see over there is your government hunters or your government employees are being paid to go shoot and leave those animals to waste. That is the last thing we want to see take place. We would rather have the opportunity to take in those animals, idolize those, memorialize those in our own each and every way, just like, your mule deer in the background, rather than just getting shot left and wasted on the hillside. So we'd like to maintain that control with the sportsman. And that's Daniel Davis's take on it.
Can I make one comment on that, RAC Chair? Just to make sure, Joe, are you aware
Yes.
that we have a spot and stock bear hunt in the fall in this region already, and all the units except basically the Book Cliffs down there don't, but the other units, we've had a spot and stock bear hunt in the fall that hunters could do the same thing for several years now, and it's not a real high success hunt, but we have had some successful folks, and it's created quite an opportunity for a lot of people.
Okay, yes, thank you. I was not aware of that.
And I guess my take on it, this is Brett, is, how many lions have we seen when we're out elk and deer hunting over all the many years? It's just not a common occurrence. And so I was laughing about it with Miles this week, and then I saw one this week, just out in the open in the daytime. It's because this meeting was coming up, I guess. But I don't think bears, maybe people know how to spot them, but lions, they're so difficult during hunting season to see anyway. I don't think the numbers are going to change a whole lot, if any, other than just one or two lucky people, like Randall said, that happen to be in the right spot at the right time. Other comments from the RAC?
This is Richie. I've got just one more comment, and something we're going to have to consider moving forward is you're probably well aware that Colorado has an initiative on their ballot this November for the introduction of wolves on the west slope. That includes the northwest portion of Colorado. So if that goes through, we're going to have wolves on our doorstep. I run cattle, on the Utah-Colorado line, so I'm involved in an effort to defeat that initiative, obviously. But within a matter of time, wolves are probably going to be, if that initiative passes, wolves are going to be a factor in this Northeast region. I just don't think there's any way of getting around it. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife are currently monitoring wolves on Cold Mountain, which is just on the other side of Diamond Mountain there. So I don't know how that's going to change the dynamics. It's going to change a lot of things. And so I don't know how we deal with it, but I'm afraid it's coming.
Thank you. And I'm sure we will have to deal with that in its time. And I don't know that it will impact the lion and bear discussions today, but I think you're exactly right, Richie. We will be dealing with it at some point. I'd like to move this on a little bit, but I don't want to miss anybody's questions. So do we have any more questions?
One more, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Is there any state rule about receiving payment as a reward, if you will, for protected game in the state of Utah? I know, and I'm aware of, trophy contests or things of that nature, not to exceed $499 for that type of stuff. But is there a rule within the state preventing someone from receiving payment to take protected wildlife?
That is probably a question for either Greg or Marty, and they couldn't be here tonight. And I told them, "Oh, we won't need you." So, Daniel, I don't want to play a lawyer on TV. I know that there are regulations in the state for guides, and so they have to be registered and the rest. That's probably something we'd need to look into and have those guys weigh in on. I'm not familiar with. Are you talking about like someone maybe want to pay somebody to kill lions, something like that, with tags, obviously? But if you take like a bounty, is that what you're thinking?
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question. I can look into it and get back to you.
Okay, if you get that answer, and I can distribute it, or just distribute it to the whole RAC, if you would.
Yeah, I'll run it by those guys and email you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I will open it up to brief comments if you want to head this discussion before we have motions in any certain direction. Again, fairly brief. This is an opportunity for RAC members to state their position.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I'll go ahead and lead the charge since I've been talking the most. I apologize.
Go ahead.
So as stated, appreciate the amendment to the proposal about not closing down that summer time frame. Do understand the simplicity behind having the valid bear permit, but also do take into consideration the folks in southern Utah and LaSalle's and some time frame here that, some of the weather opportunities that are taken advantage of to take those lions are during the winter time. A lot of time they don't see snow. They're without snow more than they are with snow. So that is limiting in a lot of ways by maintaining that. So I feel more comfortable to mirror the southern region's recommendation on that without restricting that. The other was a concern that I had that I addressed with my last question. The perception with the 2 permits being made available. There's already been talk and discussion about organizations and folks out there paying parties to go and harvest and actually receive compensation to take the game that they wouldn't take intendedly. Now, view it as you may. Some are pro-predator, some are anti-predator, but that raises a moral issue to me and really resonates hard on where that direction goes. It's a lot more prevalent to have 1 permit and take that animal as viewed as a respected animal, a trophy, and what we see as a moral code to hunting and why we're doing it. And those are my areas of concern.
Thank you. Any other comments? from the RAC? Okay, we can, if there are none, we can proceed with these items separately. Or we could take a motion, if there's going to be a motion that dissects portions of this out, I would prefer to address them individually and then pass the bulk of the proposal at the end. So we just had discussion about the 2 tag unit, and also I guess we're talking about the season change as amended for the point of this discussion as we move forward. That was what was presented at the start of it. So when we talk about the seasons, we're going to be referring to the amended proposal that Darren presented. So is there any desire to take them items out, or should we just go with a motion and then maybe have an exception on the end, or how does the RAC want to do that? Whoever's comfortable making motion.
I would ask the RAC to consider, and you, Mr. Chair, to consider breaking some of these topics out that we've addressed tonight in independent.
Okay, let's start with the 2 tag proposal. And if there's any questions, bring them up. But Darren, I think, explained that real well at the start. Basically, they're either 1 spot and stock and 1 harvest objective, or 2 harvest objective tags primarily. That's most of the combinations there. You could have a split and then you would be successful and go buy a harvest objective, but it doesn't change the split seasons much. It just gives you maybe opportunity if you did have a split tag. So I'll open it up to the tag topic for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion. This is Daniel Davis. That we maintain 1 permit per person per season.
Okay. Do we have a motion to basically leave it as it is now, where you're only eligible for 1 lion tag per season? Do we have a second?
This is Dan Abeda, and I will second that motion.
Okay. We'll do a roll call. And I'm going to go, even though you made the motion, just have it clean. I'm going to call your name again. Dan Abeda?
Yes.
Joe Arnold?
I need to ask one question if I can. Where are we currently as permits versus harvest before I can go with that proposal?
It varies by unit, but
give me a statewide.
Yeah,
you know, we sell 1,000 permits and
we sell. So there were 900 and there were 796 permits available last year. We harvested just over 650 lions last year on about 800 permits. Is that ballpark enough for you? Give you a feel for it?
80%-ish, 90%.
Yeah, about 80%. Yeah.
But in this region, the only unit that approached that would have been South Slope Vernal, right?
Right. Yeah. So it varies by region and by unit. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct, Brett.
We were when we went over them numbers earlier, and I'm not sure how the 9 Mile and them other units out there on the edge of our region fit in, but we were just over 50%, or just right around 50%, with the exception of South Slope Vernal, which was near quota, 80-90%.
That's correct. I think it's important to remember though too, some of these quotas were increased quite, significantly just a couple last year or the year previous. And so it's not like the book cliffs had gone up and then were increased by the director and the emergency directive that when he added those two, so that not all of them had these high of objectives for a long term.
And so if they would have maintained, would have been more around the 80%.
would have been a lot closer. Yep.
Did that answer your question, Joe?
Yes.
Are you
based
prepared?
on, based upon that, I'd have to oppose the amendment on that. Just I think we need to probably take more lions, as Daniel mentioned, that we all have our own things that we're interested in. So
on the motion to remain at one tag, you're voting no, correct?
Correct. I would be in support of the second tag, especially if it's a spot and stock.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I got it recorded correctly. Richie?
No.
Natasha?
No.
Mike?
No.
Daniel?
Yes.
And Jamie?
No.
A motion failed 2-4 and
Hold
5.
on, Brett, you missed me.
Who'd I miss? Jeff, sorry. Sorry about that. Yeah,
I'm voting yes.
voting yes. Okay. Motion fails 3-4 and 5 against. So I will, I suppose we can leave that topic now and move forward if it's going to be included in the bulk of the proposal, and move to the other topic, which was did anyone have a desire to separate out the season? Daniel spoke in favor of it.
Yes.
You want to break it out from the overall agenda?
Mr. Chair, if I can take one step back to the last motion, where it kind of got busy in discussion there. Are we allowed to revisit that with a second motion? If it was different, since there wasn't an amendment?
Well, you're entitled to make another motion. The previous motion failed, so we're not dealing with the previous motion. But if you want to make a new motion, we can entertain that. And it can be on the same, we can still address that. If you have a different take on that 2-tag issue.
I do. And I feel these meetings are kind of unfortunate. And so we miss some of that dialogue. And I think to what Joe's referring to, and I could agree with, the concerns I have are for buying multiple harvest objective permits utilizing hounds because the success rate is so high. But I could get on board definitely with having one spot and stock accompanied by one harvest objective, but not doubling those permits within the same method of take. Is that kind of what your concerns were, Joe? If you don't mind me asking.
Yes, mine is a little bit two-parted because, of course, I'm passionate about the Book Cliffs, and we're not meeting harvest objective in the Book Cliffs. We're only taking 20 to 30 lions, and we have a quota of 44. And the deer herd's struggling. The elk are struggling. Everything's struggling, and they're addressing that with horse gathering and cow gathering and all those things. But I still feel like if the biologists feel like there are more lions to take, then I believe we need to take more lions in order to help that. That's my stance on it. Now, partly with what Richie's question was and yours, maybe into the second part, is I don't believe we should limit the houndsmen from going out there and training their dogs if we're trying to take more lions. So I'm a little bit confused on, if we're wanting to take more lions, are we limiting, the training of the dogs that help us take more lions? So, but, I can get on board with the spot and stock versus harvest objective. I could get on board with that.
So let me ask you, Darren, where part of this came down in the legislation, the spot and stock issue specifically. And then where this 2 tag idea is something we can deal with. Daniel asked if he could make the motion where the 2 tag be limited to only 1 harvest objective tag and 1 other type of tag, I think, 'cause we've still got the split, Daniel, we got to deal with, but it's a minority of the number. Is that something we can deal with as a RAC, or when we get into these rules, is that something we should better stay away from?
No, if the RAC wanted to, what we would just need to do is define what permits a person could have in combination in order to take 2. So if we wanted to limit it to 1 spot and stock and 1 harvest objective, or split in combination, but not to harvest objective, that's something that we could address in a rule, and we just have to change the wording. But that's certainly something the RAC can address if you want to.
Is that what you want to do, Daniel? Do you want to make that motion?
Yes, if I could, please, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll make a motion that an individual can obtain up to 2 lion permits a season, but the 2 permits can't be of the same method.
Okay. We have a motion to allow 2 permits as long as they are not the same type of permit. And there's only the 3 types of permits in existence, right, Darren? The spot and stock, the harvest objective, and the split.
Right. Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
So we have a motion to limit, basically we're saying people can't buy 2 harvest objective tags and go out there and shoot 2 lions either a week apart or the same day. That's basically what we're saying with the motion. So do we have a second?
Can I ask one quick question before a second?
Yes.
For say Randall and the officers, is that a hard thing to then monitor and police versus, I mean, if the tag is purchased as a spot and stock, will that be a hard thing to police as far as from the officer's standpoint? If they do take and buy 1 harvest objective and 1 spot and stock, how would that work?
I think our officers they can look that up almost instantly on their computer system that they keep with them in their truck all the time. They can look up and see what other tags the individual has purchased this year and the date of the purchase, and that will matter too with some of these seasons. But yeah, I think the officers could probably enforce that to just see which type of tags they own and are in possession of.
And also the spot and stock season is a 3-month season, not a year-round season.
That's correct. It's just the fall season, basically, for kind of during the big game hunts like we talked about earlier, John.
So it's only an issue for 3 months.
And Joe, I appreciate you bringing this up because I sympathize a little bit because I've got family and friends that enjoy to go out with me through the winter and purchase a permit. And if we're not garnered the opportunity, I like the idea that they can have the opportunity to go participate in the spot and stock while they're out deer and elk hunting. And as the more of this discussion took place, I felt more comfortable bending to that direction because it makes it a more fair, simplistic fashion and opportunity for people. Thank you.
So we have a motion on the table to allow 2 tags, but they would be required to be 2 different type of tags, not 2 harvest objective tags. You can't buy 2 spot and stocks right now anyway, I don't think. So do we have a second?
One more quick question. I apologize, Joe, again. Would they be able to track the statistics of do they have to call a conservation officer after a spot and stock tag, and will we be able to track the statistics of the spot and stock so we know exactly what the success rate is? Because I think that's important as you go forward.
Yeah, every lion has to be checked in either in an office or with a biologist or officer. So we'll get to see every single one that's harvested and how and when on what permit.
Perfect. I will second that motion that Daniel's put forth on one harvest objective and one spot and stock.
Okay. I'll call a vote. Daniel?
Yes.
Sorry for the mute. Yes.
Sure.
Sorry. Dan, Abeda?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Richie?
No.
Natasha?
No.
Mike?
Yes.
Jamie?
No.
Jeff?
Yes.
The motion passes 5-4, 3 against. Okay, is there any desire to break out this season discussion, or should we deal with the rest of the recommendation as proposed, as amended proposed?
I would like to make a motion on the season amendment, Mr. Chair,
Okay, please do.
to leave it as it is and mirror the motion made by the Southern region.
So Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, but the motion is to not limit hound hunting in the summer.
Right. The Southern Region's recommendation was to have the same lion season on those 3 units as the rest of the state, and that was what passed down there.
And that is currently the way it is?
For Book Cliffs, I believe so. For the San Juan and La Salle, that would allow lion hunting during the fall big game hunts.
Which on down around La Salle was where we had the major conflict a few years ago.
Currently have a restriction down there in the fall to eliminate hounds in the field during that time frame. But correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I don't think the Book List has that restriction. It's just like the rest of the state for lions.
Is that correct, Clint?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, so sorry, Daniel, I was just making sure I understood what the motion was when we said same as Southern Region. So the motion is to not limit hound hunting in the summer, depending on what tag you have. Correct?
That's correct, in a nutshell.
Okay, I have a motion on the table. I will entertain a second.
This is Richie, sorry, I just need one correction from Darren. So if this motion passed, the restriction on the La Salle would stay in place?
No, not the way I understand. If it's going to be the same as the Southern Region, it would not. If you wanted to leave things as they currently are, that would leave those restrictions down there. But that's not how I understood the motion.
Daniel, do we need to correct the motion a little? Do we want to leave that on that restriction in place, or what do you think?
So the ideology behind this, Richie, is, and for everyone else, the issue with the La Salles and where the multi-use comes into play is during bear season. It's a bigger issue with the bear hunting that takes place and draws in the non-residents. When we talk about lion hunting, that's more of your residential folks that live in that area and live in that region and are out doing it with the intent of lion hunting. It's not the issues that we see with bear. Now that comes from being in the field and the strategies that are implemented.
Okay, I'll second the motion.
Could the motion, this is Natasha, could the motion be clarified? I'm a little confused by the motion.
Thank you, myself.
I don't know that I can clarify it because I'm still confused on what the Southern region proposed and in relation to what is happening right now down on the LaSalle's. So I'm
I'll
not sure.
clarify, if that's okay.
Yeah, make a shot at it.
So
go ahead.
The motion is to not restrict lion hunting through the summer with a valid lion permit for that region.
And the proposal was if they had a bear permit, they could hunt, but not with just a lion permit. Correct, Darren?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So the motion is if they have a valid lion permit, do not restrict the season of hunt.
Correct. That's how I understood it.
Okay. So we'll just, so you still good with your second on that, Richie?
Yes.
Okay. I'll call for a vote. Daniel?
Yes.
Dana Beta?
Yes.
Dana Beta?
Yes, again.
Yes. Joe?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
This is Joe. I'm still a little bit confused on what it is. So does it transfer over to the big game seasons? I guess is one of my questions. Are we currently doing that? Are they allowed to pursue all year long as it's a harvest objective in the book cliffs? Are they allowed to pursue all year long, even in the big game seasons?
In the book cliffs, yes, but in the LaSalle's and is it San Juan? No.
And the problem with the reason they're putting this on there is because they feel like a lot of people were doing grabbing a lion harvest objective, or they had a bear permit. I'm a little bit confused on and why the proposal from the DNR. What's our objective with the division with this proposal?
They were buying a lion tag and then running bears to as a training, which we limited last year.
Okay.
And so they were actually training on bears. That was the concern. And I believe it's mostly non-resident because they couldn't get a bear pursuit because we limited them. And so by buying a lion tag, they could circumvent that. The suspicion was they could circumvent that limitation. Are you prepared to vote, Joe?
So what we're voting for is to keep it the same way it was, that basically as long as you have a lion tag, you're good to go.
It's actually going to even open the LaSalle and the San Juan up further. So they would take away the limitation during the big game season on the San Juan and the LaSalle.
Yeah, I would have to oppose that.
Okay. Richie, I have your vote. Natasha?
So did the Southern region want that limitation during the big game hunting season?
No, they voted to remove any limitations on any of those 3 units for lion hunting.
Okay, then I'll vote yes.
Mike?
No.
Jamie?
No.
Jeff?
No.
That I believe is 4 in favor and 4 no. Is the process that I vote, Miles? Is that how that works?
Yes, that's where you'll be the tiebreaker. Yeah.
Okay. To tell you why I'm going to vote how I am, I remember all our discussion and the 80 complaints that came in one season from the bow hunters on the LaSalle. And so I'm not too worried about it from a book list perspective, but as proposed, I'm going to vote no to keep that limitation on the hounds in the LaSalles and San Juan. So the motion fails, 5-4. 4-4, 5 against. So I guess we haven't had much discussion about anything else on the specifically in the proposal, or if there's another angle on this motion, I would entertain that.
So before we go into the general remainder of the proposal, I did have one more that I asked questions on for clarification from Darren, and I'm prepared to make a motion if I could, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, what was the topic that we're splitting out?
It was the rule amendment that was made about addressing age reference to lions.
Okay, gotcha. So go ahead, Daniel, with your motion.
I make a motion that we remove age from that rule and direct that rule more at markings and identification of body markings. And it's that simple. That's my motion, and I can give some clarification if you'd like.
No, I think with the discussion you had was educational to us all, so I think we know what you're talking about. And you understand what the motion is, Darren?
Yeah, I think we'll need to look at the definition of a kitten, but I think if we remove a reference to less than a year old and just keep that with an animal with spots, with visible spots, that's probably what you're after, right, Daniel?
It is, and emphasize, reason being is to emphasize more in on the check-in process and address more of those types of take rather than focusing on whether he was a year old or a year and a half old.
Okay, yeah, we can address that if that's your motion.
Okay, is that something, should we make a motion on that specifically?
Yeah, if you want something different than what the rule is proposed to say, yeah.
So I believe, does everybody understand the motion? The motion is we take out reference of age in the description of a legal lion to harvest and replace it with description of the animal to indicate its age rather than to reference its age rather than saying an animal a year old or less, which is pretty vague. I agree. So we have that motion. Do we have a second?
Jeff Taniguchi, I second it.
Okay. Roll call. Daniel?
Yes.
Dana Beta?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Natasha?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
And Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, I will entertain a motion on the remainder of the proposal.
Yeah, this is Deanna Beta, and I will make a motion that we accept the remainder of the proposal as the division is presented here tonight.
I second. This is Jamie Areve.
Jamie seconds that. Okay, roll call. Daniel?
No.
Okay, Dana Beta?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Richie?
Yes.
Natasha?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
And Jeff?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for all the really good discussion. I think we get educated every time we have these meetings. And Darren, thank you for an excellent job of answering all the questions. And you'll get back to us on the one question where you're going to talk to legal counsel.
I will, yeah, and I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
I believe, Miles, did you have anything else?
I don't have anything else. Just again, appreciate everybody's time participating in the process and providing input and feedback. And it's important process for people to get their feedback and input into these kinds of decisions. So thank you. I think we'll just need a motion to adjourn, and that's all we'll need to do.
Okay, I will entertain that motion.
Motion to adjourn, Jeff Taniguchi.
Second?
This Richie, I second.
Okay, Daniel?
Yes.
Dana Beta?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Natasha? They took this motion pretty serious. She left already.
Yeah.
Mike?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
And Jeff made the motion, so we have it. Natasha, are you there? Okay, we have 7 in favor of adjourning and 1 abstain, and we're out of here. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you guys.